Welcome to Sundays at Cafe Tabac, the podcast. I'm your host, Karen Song. This podcast series is an extension of our film's mission to affirm and extol the courage, strength, and joy in our LGBTQ+ community through the preservation and sharing of our personal stories and collective history. On this episode, I had the pleasure of chatting with my dear friend, multidisciplinary creative, Sara Elise. And for the first time for this podcast series in front of a live audience, you can view the video recording at Cafe Tabac Film on Vimeo and YouTube. Sara Elise. She's the author of A Recipe for More, her debut book released with HarperCollins in 2023. She's the co-founder and designer of Apogeo Guest House, a boutique hotel concept space in Nicaragua that centers queer and trans POC, as well as the founder of Harvest and Revel, a New York-based sustainable event catering plus design company. As an autistic Black and Indigenous femme, she spends much of her thought space contemplating pleasure and pain, collective joy and healing, otherness, embodiment, remembering and reclaiming, self-destruction and growth, and how inextricably those concepts are linked. To that end, Sara Elise has deep interests in ritualization, BDSM, relationship dynamics, and the development of decolonized personal awareness and well-being. With all of her work, she aims to challenge our collective reality by first reimagining and then creating alternative systems and spaces for Black and Indigenous people of color and LGBTQIA two-spirit plus people to thrive. I am so excited to have her join us on our podcast. And for this episode, I'd like to thank Jesse Levendoff, who filmed and recorded the event. A very special thank you to Gwen Shockey and Raya Lerner for inviting us to be a part of their Addresses Project exhibition and residency at City Lore in the East Village, New York, where we recorded this podcast event. The Addresses Project is doing some incredible work documenting queer spaces and the folks who have built them, which also featured Sundays at Cafe Tabac co-founders Wanda, Acosta, and Shari Nash. A huge thank you goes out to Molly Garf and City Lore for hosting us and holding space for our narratives and documentation of lesbian spaces in this great city that we love and continue to contribute to. And without further ado, Sara Elise. I wanted to start the night out with a quote from her book, appropriately so, and it's about the act of naming. The act of naming is both a conclusion as well as the beginning. It implies a process that first starts with encountering, a learning of self and a writing of your narrative. We are in survival mode when the recipe of our life is of someone else's choosing. But visibility helps us more clearly define who we aren't, so that we tell the story to others and to ourselves and who we are. Visibilizing and naming our differences for and with one another can help us to celebrate them and ultimately our whole and full selves more honestly. Sara.
Karen.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. I think this quote is so perfect in line with what we're trying to do with our podcast. I think in the queer community, I think there's a lot of different feelings around coming out and coming out stories. But I really feel that it is such a gift because we have an opportunity, and in this kind of formal speak of coming out, in a kind of, rite of passage where we really have to not confront, but like embrace and acknowledge to somebody else and publicly who we are. And I think that defining process is so valuable. And it's not that it's singular. It can change. It can change depending on your audience. It could change over time because we're not stagnant people. We're organic beings that constantly change. So, with that, I would love to open it up and ask you what your coming out story is. And in this time, it doesn't mean it's forever this, but, I think for me, I know how it changed my life, even though I thought, everyone knows, but for me to tell the most important person that I couldn't tell it to, what that meant for me. And it's not that for everyone, but I do know that during the process of this podcast, hearing everyone's coming out stories has been so incredible. And you talk to people from all different walks of life, and there's some kernel of it that is so meaningful that you can connect to. And I really love this idea of personal storytelling in our narratives, and in the kind of like holy sense of storytelling, of, you know, sitting around the campfire and like really listening to people, and the vulnerability that comes with that, and hearing people and really seeing people is so holy. So thank you for joining us in this. And what was your coming out like?
Well, firstly, thank you for having me. It's so lovely to be here in such an iconic New York place, because I love New York. And even though I wasn't at Sundays at Cafe Tabac, I dream of it. I feel nostalgic for it. I feel like I grew up there in many ways. And it definitely birthed an era that I'm grateful to be part of now. So thank you so much for seeing me in that history and including my voice in this project. I really appreciate it and feel honored to be here. Thank you for reading that part in my book. I completely agree. I think that in an ideal world, right, like no one would have to come out necessarily, because everything would just be open and everyone's open-minded, and each day you can just say how you feel and who you're into, and you don't have to really necessarily define anything. But because we don't have that privilege, then I think that the act of naming ourselves, firstly for ourselves, is political, and it's also necessary. And I think that, I agree, it's holy and it's beautiful, and it's an act of telling a story about ourselves so that we know who we are. And we're kind of, in that telling of that story, standing in our story and standing in our truth, and saying that even if we're not, that we're comfortable sharing that with other people. We're kind of like faking it until we make it with the coming out, in a sense. Because I think, like me, when I did come out, kind of officially, I wasn't necessarily comfortable with who I was. I wasn't necessarily comfortable in coming out, but I knew that it was necessary in order to move in the next phase of my life more openly, and having to do less explanation. But that being said, I mean, I really don't think I've had one coming out, especially as a femme. I've had to come out, I don't know, thousands, millions of times in my life as a femme, because most people, and I always make this joke with my partners, I always think that I don't look queer. I'm like, well, you know, when people see me, they assume I'm straight. And my partner, I literally once said this when I had a fully shaved head, a rat tail going down my back. I was wearing cutoff shorts, I think like lace up Converse, an A-line shirt, like tattoos all over my arms and legs. And I think we were walking somewhere, and I was like, well, everyone just assumes I'm straight, so I don't know what to do. And they were just like, do you see your... Okay. But yeah, I mean, I think now I really am not ever in straight spaces, which thank you, Goddess, for blessing my life in the ways that you have. So I don't actually have to come out that much as a queer person, but I do have to come out as autistic a lot. And I think that coming out process, I think any coming out process is really similar in the sense that it's a naming and a claiming of ourselves for ourselves first and foremost, and then a sharing with other people that's important. But so when you told me you're going to be asking me about my coming out story, I was like, oh, okay, well, I have no memory of my life for many reasons, but I'm like, when did I come out? Like, when was the big deal moment? And so I think in college, when I was at university, I was dating this basketball playing dyke, as to be expected of my personal brand. And I decided to bring her back to my parents' house for the first time over like a holiday break or something. And up until then, they like knew me as boy crazy, or I don't know. I don't know what was going on there, but they knew me as boy crazy. So then when I just like without any notice brought this 6'2" like studly little thing, they were just like, what's happening? What's going on? But my family is very Baptist Christian, and no one really approached it or said anything about it. But then when I was leaving my parents' house, my dad pulled me aside and was like, I just want you to know that anything that you do, and any time you present as a gay person anywhere, I will not be showing up. You don't have my support. We're Christian. We love everyone, but we do not, I don't know what you're doing here with this person, but we do not support it. So I just want you to be on the same page as us. And so I remember that memory very vividly. And I think that then propelled me into a more formal coming out, because up until then I was just like, you know, I'm here, I'm doing my thing. I remember the LGBTQ center had these shirts that said, I am, period. And so if someone walked around with that on campus, it was like a big deal. So I remember I was walking around and like no Black people were out as gay at my university. And I remember like wearing the shirt very timidly, like walking through the quad. And it was like a big deal. I remember reading this like anonymous messaging on this web. It was called like Juicy Campus or something. And people were like, oh yeah, like Sara Elise is telling everyone she's gay now. And it was like this whole thing. But yeah, so that conversation with my dad, or more like him sharing his Christian views with me, kind of propelled me into this like, oh, I don't actually want to deal with this from other people, and I don't have the luxury of just showing up how I want to show up. People are going to have questions, people are going to have opinions, and a way that I can kind of get in front of that, but also a way that I can do the naming and the claiming for myself ahead of time, so that I don't even actually have to deal with people's opinions, so that they kind of know that I'm closing the door for them in that sense, is to come out. So I decided to write everyone an email letter that I brought with me.
No, wait, Sarah, this is so on point.
So I actually couldn't find it in my email, and I was like, did I even write this letter? I have a horrible memory, I don't remember, but my childhood best friend, actually, I had CC'd her on it, so that was great. So she was able to find it for me and sent it over. So this was my letter from when I was in business school. So I'm saying that so you have the framing. Yes, I'm autistic. I was also in business school. It's very professional. It's very, yeah. It's like okay. Hey, Mom. And can you pass this message along to Dad as well, please? Although I'm sure both of you already know by now, I wanted to send you an official coming out email. I am currently, and have been for the past 2+ years, in a pretty serious relationship with Alexa, the girl you met recently. As you know, she is an absolutely beautiful person, and she makes me extremely happy. Regardless of the fact that I am dating Alexa, I identify as a lesbian / not heterosexual. This may be hard for you to understand, especially considering the religious and cultural implications that you may associate with this identity. I'm definitely open to dating men in the future, but as of now, I do not see myself being in a romantic relationship with a man ever again. Obviously, this may change, and I'm open to all that God places on my path. I am open to a lot of openness here. I am open to talking with you and answering any questions you may have about anything. No one asked me any questions. I sent this letter to like 20 different adults in my life. No one had any follow-up or questions. I also have a vast supply of resources, in parentheses, articles, books, etc., that you may want to reference that may help you understand more of what I'm sharing with you on your own terms. I'm just so generous.
This is so you.
Again, I would love to have you at my graduation in May because I consider you both my parents, which in fact were my parents. I will be mailing the announcement shortly and look forward to being with all of those who have come out to show support at the culmination of my college career. However, let me know if you would feel uncomfortable being there. Although I will inevitably be disappointed, I will do my best to understand where you're coming from. With love always, Sara Elise, and then my business signature underneath. Wow. That was great. Yeah.
That was a good applause and applause.
Yeah, so that was my kind of like official. I remember being very nervous. I had Alexa look it over. I had some of my friends look it over. And I sent that to several adults who I had grown up with being present in my life, many of whom are not present in my life anymore. And it was just a kind of culminating moment of me living in a certain way and kind of just like beginning to live in a certain way, but recognizing that my life was going down a queered pathway, like not even just in who I'm dating, but in what I'm thinking about and who I'm around and the type of space that I'm taking up. And it was just an important moment for me. And yeah, I didn't get a lot of feedback. I didn't get a lot of questions. I didn't get a lot of support. And I think if relationships are going to end because someone doesn't support you, I think it's better to just know as quickly as possible versus doing the hiding to appease. And then it's not actually going to work out in the long term because they don't see you. So it was kind of just my way of being like, all right, y'all, like this is what is happening now and is going to be happening for the foreseeable future, even though I'm open to dating men. And yeah, that I was naming that, and it felt like a pivotal moment for me.
So it seems like it was like really a light switch moment for you, like in terms of being able to cut people out who weren't there to support you. Like you had at least the wherewithal to be like, you know what, if you're not down with who I am, then too bad for you.
Yeah.
Was there like, that moment where you hit send? I mean, by that point, you're already like full confidence. You had everyone read your email and say, yeah, this is great. So you had like people behind you to lean on. What did it feel like when you hit send? Was there any feelings of like the fear of the unknown on the other side, or was what you had in front of you so rich that there must have been some pangs of like things are going to change, because sometimes that does come with anxiety for folks. But wondering if that had any, like how that manifests, if it did at all.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I feel like I don't have full confidence with anything ever. And I have so much anxiety with everything always. So no matter, I did have so much support. And I think that has been something that's been a really, really beautiful gift and blessing in my life, is I do manage to attract these beautiful, generous people that are so loving and supportive of me. And that makes everything so much easier, but everything is still so hard. Mm-hmm. And I think that, it was a moment of knowing like, I'm probably going to lose a bunch of people, but again, then I guess they're not meant to be there in the first place, is the way that I was thinking about it. But still the uncertainty around everything. And I think especially like wanting the people who I felt closest with to receive that and feel grateful. Like I'm letting you in on something and now we can be even closer. Given the religious context that I grew up in, I think that felt really hard for me, especially since I didn't have a close relationship with my parents. And kind of relied on like my aunts and uncles and my grandmother for like that more familial feel. So knowing that I might lose that and already feeling like I wasn't really tethered to my parents, it's like, okay, cool. Well, I'm just out here wearing my I am shirt with my queer community. But yeah, so I actually did receive a response from my godparents, my Aunt Connie and my Uncle Eric. And my Uncle Eric was actually murdered 3 years ago. And they were the first people I got a response from. Sorry, excuse me. But they were the first people I got a response from, and yeah, so he just responded and was like, we're always so happy for you. And even though they actually are the most Baptist Christian folks in my whole family, they were just like, we will always love you. Thanks. We will always love you and support you. And like, we're not coming to your graduation for other reasons, like personal reasons, but we love you and would love to be there. And then they actually ended up coming. But yeah, so they were always just like the most supportive of me. And that felt really special, that I like, especially now knowing the way that life kind of transformed in this way and how he's not with me anymore, like knowing that we had that and he was actually super receptive and wanting to know me and be close to me feels really special.
How was your relationship with them thereafter? Like, were you still in touch? Like,
yeah, they've always been, I mean, they live in Virginia, and they've, just always been like as present as, we could be in each other's lives. But yeah, I actually hosted my aunt upstate. So my uncle, my father, Eric, and their son, they were both killed. And so their other son and my aunt, they survived. And I just hosted my aunt last year upstate, and we got to just like spend some deep time together. And yeah, it's just amazing to see how religion can, like the way that, I mean, we're not even going to go into this now, but the way that people can use religion's just like message of peace and love to separate and destroy. And then when people don't do that, like she's like the most religious person I know, and she's always been the most loving and the most in touch and the most connected and the most accepting. And it's just very deep to see how that plays out in both extremes.
Do you have any, I mean, I don't know what your relationship to your parents are now, but were they also kind of like access point to your parents to know what they were going through or thinking or, what they're feeling? And I know you're close with your siblings as well. So I wondered how it all, like your godmother and your godfather, when he was alive, did you talk about your queerness and like how that kind of came through? Like, once you came out, like how did that then play out for the rest of the years?
Yeah, no, my family doesn't talk about anything really. So no one ever brought it up. But I knew that it was there, right? Like it was now present in the space, and it wasn't this thing where I'm like, oh, I wonder if they know that this person that's here is my partner. Like, of course, everyone knows, but yeah, it just felt like it was kind of just not hush hush, but it just wasn't ever really brought up. And then, yeah, my grandmother responded. We used to be really close, and she responded horribly and ended up like actually physically attacking me one time in our home, in my parents' home. and we're not close anymore, but like I've had talks with her because on like different holiday cards or whatever, she'd be like, to Sarah and her little friend, or like just so disrespectful. Grandmothers.
In her way, somehow she's probably overcoming a huge hurdle.
But yeah, so I think it wasn't ever, I don't think that it was ever something that it was like, oh, okay, well now we're going to help your parents understand, or I don't think that generation is like has the tools for those types of conversations maybe, or at least those folks in my family. And yeah, I think that now my mom is showing up and being more supportive, and it's been this really beautiful, transformative time between us. And I think that's just a sign of the times changing. And my littlest sister, who's like very queer, you know, she's Gen Z. We're like almost 20 years apart. She's Gen Z, and it's like, love is love. And like, you know, Gen Z's just like out here, and love them, love everything they're doing. They are the future. And she's just transforming my mom. Like my mom has now a love is love sticker on her phone, and like a little like rainbow heart. What is it? Gibbets on her cross. My mom also is probably a dyke, like, but yeah, so it's just been really cool to see that transformation and just allow folks the space to change, because now that I've said my truth, I've said the thing that's me, I don't have any more responsibilities here. Like I am just here for you to be on your journey. It has nothing to do with me. I can provide companionship and resources when I have capacity, but her journey is her own, and I don't feel responsible for it. And I also don't feel personally victimized by it anymore. So it's just been, it's been a special thing to watch her learn and grow.
When you sent your coming out letter to your parents, did you have that feeling of like euphoria? Like now we all know who I am. Like we're visible in each other's eyes, or I'm visible to your eyes. I know that when I came out to my dad finally, it was like this fear before that he wouldn't know who I was. Like if one of us would go before this moment, like the idea that we don't know each other, even if we don't agree with each other, that I'm not seen. Like I wonder, you know, for a lot of people that we spoke to, this coming out moment was such a big relief because of this, you know, naming and being visible to yourself and to the people that matter to you. Like did that arouse any feelings like that?
Yeah, definitely. I think anytime I share a piece of myself with people, it triggers this thing in my brain where I'm like, you know, I'm inviting someone in to see me more clearly. So it creates this intimacy, even if it's not something that the other person is receiving necessarily. It creates an opening, it creates a space for the intimacy, an invitation that I'm extending to someone, and then hopefully they'll take my hand, right? That's the intention. A lot of times they don't, but I think that, it felt like a relief. And I think in hindsight, it felt like this beautiful gift. Like anytime we come out about anything and share anything about who we are more deeply, right? We're offering someone a gift. And I think that being as generous as I can possibly be is my responsibility in my life. And beyond that, you know, it's not up to me. It's not up to me if they accept my gift, but I hope that they will. And I hope that they'll meet me in this shared intimacy. That's the hope. And I think with my mom, right, I extended my hand. She ignored the invitation. And now, I mean, I don't even know, like 20 years late, like, I don't even know the time because I have no concept of time, but so many years later, she's now finally starting to reach her hand out to me too. And I think that it all started from this initial vulnerability and this initial, an initial step in vulnerability that I was so nervous to do. But anytime we take that step, it always ends up creating a ripple effect that hopefully will make others eventually feel more comfortable in joining us.
You planted the seed, and it took that much time. And if you hadn't, she might just go through the world with her religious beliefs completely, behind a brick wall.
Yeah.
But she was able to be open to then what ultimately your sister presented, or the world.
Yeah.
And I always think about, when we present ourselves, our queer selves, to our elders, we are gifting them, because it gives them access to a world that is so cool.
Right.
I mean, to see our community, to be able to connect with that in some way that is tangible. I think it is such a gift whenever I'm in queer spaces and with our people, and we all have these moments, and we share this where we're like, look how amazing we are. Like, we're so colorful, and we get to express ourselves in ways that most of the world can't and won't.
Right.
And have created ideologies to allow them not to, and politics behind that, and everything. And so it is such a gift where people can, you're welcome, society, even like silly shows like Queer Eye for the Straight Eye, or whatever that show is, it's just like, oh, we can just kind of like ease a little bit out of our straightness for a moment. That's not our role, but you're welcome.
Totally. And everyone wants to be more queer,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're the culture setters, we're the trendsetters, we create the culture,
Mm-hmm.
we liven the world, we make it brighter. So yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah. And I also find that sometimes with our elders too, the idea of queerness is also stagnated in the politic that they knew at their time.
Yeah.
And so I remember when, they them pronouns came out, or, a lot more trans visibility was starting to emerge, in the kind of late 2000s. This idea of well, why does it have to be, it's just complicated. And it's no, it's not complicated. It's exactly what we did back then, even the idea of this word queer coming out of being called a lesbian, and how the names keep changing. Yes, it's an organic thing. We're constantly in process. We're constantly in process of coming out and fine tuning that. And also being able to say, I'm not just this, but I'm this and that. And language doesn't hold all of who we are, our identities. So we're constantly saying we can be this, but it also comes in this flavor or this expression. And it doesn't have to be so singular. And I think it's really hard when I hear elder queer communities saying oh, so many names. And it's yes, that's great. It's an evolution of the thing that we set in motion. And it's going to continue, where Gen Z generation are probably going to be oh my God, what is this? It's we're trying to expand in this kind of acid trip kind of way that accesses really our spiritual selves,
Yeah, I think the essence of queerness is questioning, right? And I talk about that in my book, it.
Yes. Early chapters. Yeah.
I think the essence of queerness is questioning, and so we're always going to be coming up with new language and ways of being and expansive identities, because we're always questioning our present, right? So if we're always questioning our present and choosing to do something outside of what's fine or what's okay or what's complacent or what we've been told, the story that's been told to us, then we're always going to be improving and creating something new. The essence of who we are is what helps us reimagine a new future for ourselves.
Mm-hmm. The moment that your father confronted you after you brought home Alexa, it reminds me of probably my first coming out to my family. That was, I think I always brought home my girlfriends, but, we're in, Korean family, immigrant family. We don't really talk about anything really about our relationships or feelings. And there's a lot of also, cultural things, but also, inherited traumas and all these other things. But I I have part of my auntie lived with us then, and she's religious fanatic, Baptist, speak in tongues kind of branch of religion. We have others that are more tame, but we have a whole kind of channel of family that's like that. And she lived with us. She was our matriarch. And I remember there was one girlfriend that I brought home, my friends. And my friends who were sleeping over. And
you were allowed to have sleepovers. Wow. It's progressive.
I remember coming out to go to the bathroom, and she pulled me aside and she said something to the effect of like, don't do anything, or like, be careful. God doesn't like, I can't remember what she said, but she acknowledged it. And I was like really taken aback and almost like jubilant, like euphoric inside, because I was like, she sees me, and she had the wherewithal to cross this boundary, the thing that we don't talk about. And she stepped over that to in my eyes, to tell me that she sees me. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm seen. Like, and I remember just kind of being tickled by it also, because like, it wasn't my dad. My dad, he ultimately actually didn't even care. But it meant, that's a whole other story that I talk about in my podcast interview. But it was the idea of being seen, even if it wasn't in a positive light, that she saw me, and through her religion and all that, like, warned me of the hellfires.
Have you experienced the hellfires yet?
Oh, it's great. If queerness is the hellfire, then give me more. So yeah, I just wondered if in that moment of disappointment and fear, and like, I mean, I can imagine your heart was in like your throat at that moment of being confronted in that way. There's a kind of shock if there was something about being seen even then, that might have also planted the seed for your ultimate email, where it's like, let me claim this, let me take ownership of this, let me get in front of this before you get to define this.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that I grew up in such a strict household that I was so scared of my dad. And so also, it was very complex because I felt very close to him, like I was daddy's girl, but also I was terrified of him. So the idea that I was breaking a rule or doing something that he didn't approve of, because up until that point, I had like followed his guidance. I went to business school. I was like doing all these things that were supposed to make me successful in his eyes. So this was kind of the first time where he expressed this like deep disinterest and deep separation with me and with who I am ultimately, right? Like I do love creating businesses. It is my special interest, but it's not, and actually maybe that is who I am, but the other things that I was doing up until that point, like it's things that he wanted me to do, but it wasn't who I am. And so to have him really confront me and be like, oh, I don't accept who you are. And beyond that, like he kind of said it as a choice. So I don't think I did feel seen by him, because he was kind of like, wherever you choose to present, like if you decide to go down this path, just so you know, I'm not supportive of you. And it was kind of this thing where he knew he was manipulating me. Like he knows how much power he had over my life. So he was kind of like, hey, just to let you know, like do this and you're out, kind of thing. So yeah, I don't think I did feel seen by him. I felt really scared, but I think that moment was really important because I don't know if it was just a result of my avoidant attachment stuff coming up, but I basically got really scared. And then I was like, oh, okay, well, I guess that's it for us. Like that's the end of our relationship as we know it. And in many ways it has been. So it was really sad to lose a closeness with him, to lose a closeness with my grandmother. Like my grandmother and I had talked on the phone every day, and she is very much the matriarch of my family. And so it felt really sad to all of a sudden lose that connection. But again, it's like, if you can't meet me where I am, what are we doing here? I can't act the whole time that I'm with you. I can't create this vision of myself that you want me to be to appease you. It's just not sustainable. It's like masking being autistic. I can do it for short spurts to make someone comfortable. And that's a gift when I choose to do that, but I can't do it all the time. It's like I'm in drag all the time. It's not a sustainable thing. So for someone to expect that of me, like, you don't love me. You don't actually love me. You love your projection of me. You love what you want me to be as an extension of you, which actually has to do with you and is not any of my business. So, yeah.
Well, let's talk about your book. I think we've kind of peppered that throughout this conversation, but it's really wonderful, and it's interesting because it's kind of like part memoir, and I think it also could go in the self-help book section of the bookstore.
Self-help is my favorite book genre, FYI. So it's very fitting that I wrote a part self-help book.
There are lots of great kind of tools, and also just an awareness, because it touches on the many parts of who you are. Why was it important for you to kind of literally name it, like put it down on paper for the world to see, like what a vulnerable process? And even the process of writing can be difficult, like especially when you're writing by yourself without the mask of like fiction where you're writing through a character. This is like, this is me, and this happened in my life, and this is how I feel, and how I interpret the world. What went into wanting to name the things, of all the components of what they mean to you, and like in self-definition?
Yeah, I think I don't know another way of being. I think that this is the way that I exist in the world. I think that I don't know how to be small or I think, or maybe if I do know how, that's because I learned that. And so I think the process of writing this book was unlearning being small, unlearning that I shouldn't take up space, unlearning that I should be respectable, unlearning that I should be quiet. And I think that this book was me kind of just sharing, my recipe for abundance and ease and how I've created this life for myself, but also sharing deeply vulnerable things, because I think that that's where the juice is. Like, that's what I'm interested in. When I meet someone and I'm talking to someone, I'm interested in the time that they almost died. I'm interested in like the thing that turns them on the most. I'm interested in like one of my friends and I literally talk about, if we were to commit suicide, what's the most romantic way that we could do that? Like that, these are the types of conversations that interest me. And so I think that's what I wanted to put down, instead of this like kind of filtered and watered down thing that might sell more books or might appease my publisher. I wanted to just show up as...
I wanted to touch upon your BDSM practice, because I feel like it is such a vulnerable space, and to write it and publish, and also social media. Like, why is that important for you to kind of claim and share with others? It can be a very personal practice, and I know that a lot of people in my generation, my Black friends from the 90s, men especially, who were very like, I'm not going to get caught up in that, because the images can be really loaded, and the legacy of incarceration and the history of this country is so heavy that it can sometimes be hard to separate from that, or it's just loaded, and for everybody it's different. But I'm wondering like where your relationship to it and what the evolution of it means to you, like in terms of being able to talk about it publicly, showing it, sharing, discussing it in the book, and what your relationship to it is.
Yeah, I think, again, when I have something in my life that I'm very interested in, it feels disingenuous for me to not be loud and share it. So I don't have any desire in minimizing my interest for the sake of respectability. And I think when I was first starting in my BDSM practice, I was training under a dom, and they had me do a bunch of homework and research to find imagery of Black folks participating in BDSM. And I could find very little imagery. All the images that I saw were, especially of Black women, and queer people, were folks looking disempowered. So folks just like looking really submissive or coy or like tortured, not in a good way, like maybe this isn't consensual. And yeah, I just didn't, I felt like that is what society wants us to see. Like that's the result of the trauma and the oppression, because actually there are Black kinky people. There's been Black kinky people since the beginning of time. And I know that because I learn again and again and again, the more that I am vulnerable, the more that I share whatever piece of me that maybe is not widely accepted or widely celebrated, or oftentimes it's something I'm sharing that I don't see out in the world. I'm sharing it because I want to see more things like this. The more I give permission to other Black and Indigenous kinky folks, to other disabled folks, to anyone who wants to take up space in that way. And I think that's just my role. That's why I'm here, is to be not a trailblazer of sorts, because then I think there's ego in that. I think I'm here to just give permission, in being authentic and feeling like I can't do anything but be honest and be open and be authentic, even when I feel nervous, even when I feel scared, even when I feel embarrassed. As long as I just keep showing up with the honesty, that's radical, right? And that's going to change things. Even if it changes things for one person in this room, like that's it. That's why I'm here tonight. That's why I do the things. That's why I do literally everything that I do, is to create space for other people to live authentically and be their fullest self. And I was talking about this with my partner one of my partners this past week. It's so funny because humanity, right, is literally all of us. We each have our unique skill sets. We each have our unique charts and things that we're good at and bad at, and things that make us nervous, and places that we just shine naturally and we're comfortable in. And so if we all work together with our unique things, we would be thriving. But instead, society is like, everyone must be the same. Don't do anything offbeat. Don't do anything weird. Just rein it in and behave just like the person next to you. And it's just like the most bonkers thing. Like, so I'm just here to just like be the weirdest that I can fucking be. Like, I'm just here to just like, yeah, if I'm being suspended in rope and that is changing my literal fucking neural pathways in the intergenerational healing that I'm doing by like transmuting this pain into deep connection, and like this is what I'm doing, and I'm creating space for everyone to do the thing that they need to do for them by being open about it.
Yeah, that's at the core of the idea of visibility. It's where, or the politics of visibility is to also, it's a way to connect with community and give permission, or help others give themselves permission, like, oh, I'm not the only one. So once we can see it, we can be it, right?
Right.
And I love that.
Yeah, a lot of people don't even know. Like, we don't know. And in so many ways, I wrote this book for younger versions of me and just for young people in my communities, because a lot of times you just like don't even know what you can stretch for if you don't have an example of it.
Mm-hmm.
So why not just be open about all the things that I am? Because then maybe there's this one young person who's like, oh yeah, I'm interested in that, but I like, maybe they feel some shame. Now they don't have to feel that way as much because they have someone who resonates with them.
Mm-hmm. And apropos to the title of your book, it feels like this priority of pleasure and honoring your joy cuts through all the fat of everything, so that and also the honesty of self cuts through everything, and thus to want to emerge all your identities. Why was it important for you to really talk about your autism and as a very important part of and special part of who you are? I guess it's kind of leading and showing kind of like, I think the leaning on expressing that as a gift, I think, is also then giving permission for others to see it as a gift as opposed to as an ailment or an illness.
Yeah, I think the world has a very skewed view of autism, and not everyone who's autistic identifies as being disabled, but disability in general. And I think that a lot of people, even who maybe have done research or who do have a basic understanding, still see being autistic as, this like illness. And it's just so interesting because the reason that I can do, like you were like, oh, Sarah's accomplished so many things and I don't know if she has the time. I'm autistic. Like, the reason that I can do so many things, my brain moves at a rapid speed. Like, the reason that I can do so many things and put so much out into the world and still create, all this personal space for me and my relationships is because I'm autistic. Like, so much of what I can do and so much of how I can show up is because I'm autistic. Mm-hmm. And it took a while for me to get there because I have so much internalized ableism that I'm working through still all the time. But now the more that I realize that my frustration is with the world and not with my brain, the more I see how fantastical being autistic is. It's just the biggest gift. And so, it felt very important for me to include that as part of my story because this is me, and that's the lens through which I experience the world. That's the lens through which my nervous system experiences the world. Mm-hmm. So it's a part of everything I create, everything I experience.
And you've also built some really beautiful, inclusive queer spaces. For example, in Nicaragua. Why is it important for you to also like invite your community in and to kind of like break the boundaries of where, queer POC can exist in, whether it's in the food movement or, the slow foods movement or in, vacation. Like,
just anywhere, right? I want us to be everywhere. And I think growing up in a house where I didn't feel welcome, just growing up in a space that I didn't feel welcome and just being in a world that I don't feel welcome, it's so important to me to create, first imagine and then imagine what types of spaces I can create where folks can feel welcome and then create them for people. And oftentimes, it's a little selfish too, because oftentimes the spaces I host are the ones that I feel the most comfortable in. I just wanted to create spaces, and why I host so many different events and New York and why I have now designed this hotel concept space for the past several years in Nicaragua is because I want to invite people into a space where they can feel comfortable fully showing up as themselves, fully, just sitting by the pool with their chest scars out, just being able to kiss and love on their partner in a way without having to be like, oh, or is that like weird straight people are so weird. They have weird straight couple looking at me from across the pool, just like a space for us all to just be present and open and free. That's what I want to create all the time with every space that I host.
Oh, wow. And to bring it back around to the film, in talking to Wanda, who was one of the founders of the Café Tabac parties in the early 90s, she shared that she had actually created the space because she wanted to create a space where she felt comfortable. And that kind of expansion of what a lesbian wasn't quite, like she just wanted, because there weren't diverse spaces. There weren't spaces that were a little elevated. They were like grungy bars in East Village. And just having to build it yourself in order to kind of like create the world that you want to exist in.
Right.
And how that is an energy and a force. And when Tabac happened, it just took a life of its own. And it still resonates today. And that's the reason why we're making this film. Sara, I want to thank you so much for sharing your story. Your coming out story was really a gem, and I know it's not always easy to share, especially in front of an audience. You're the first person in the trailblazer spirit that you are. You're the first to do a live audience recording of our podcast, so thank you so much, and it's a real gift to sit down and talk to you in this kind of formal setting.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure.
This is beautiful.
If you want to support the film, there are Venmo scan things around, or you can go on our website. And please spread the word. We're kind of at post in the film, and we're just finishing some editing and getting some animation elements. But the film has progressed a lot from the trailer that you saw. When we started it, it felt like everyone was like, "Well, we have so many rights. Why do you need to make this film?" And then marriage equality happened, and it was like, "Oh, we're here! Wow!" In some ways. But then Pulse happened. And then it just kept happening. And now, who would have known? Yeah. We have this mess. I mean, it just came to the surface, I guess, right? And with the religious right, it's just taking a life of its own. So we all continue to do the work and show up and share our vulnerabilities and rely on community. And I'm so happy that you all came out tonight to be here in person. It really means a lot. And it's a practice that we really believe in celebration of nightlife, that Café Tabac is about, in-person nightlife, I should say. And Sara will be here to sign books.
Yeah, I have some books for sale if anyone's interested, and I'm happy to sign them for you or not.
Well, I want you to sign my copy, for starters.
I don't want to force this, but would you be open to a question or two?
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I'm not used to this format.
Anybody has.
I have one. You mentioned at the beginning that or maybe it was, someone said it started during the pandemic, but you just said it was before that?
The film started before, but the podcast.
The party was in the night.
The party was 90.
When did you start making the film?
We started making the film, I would say the first interview probably popped off about 10 years ago with Hilton Alls from the New Yorker. And at first we thought we were making a cute little documentary about this awesome party that we used to go to that are like old people who are like, remember, it was the best party ever. Was it really the best party? I don't know. But we're going to interview our friends because everyone still talks about it like it was the hottest thing that ever happened. And like 20 years had passed, 25, whatever, many years. So we just, he just happened to be our first interview. And oh my God, I mean, if you know Hilton's work, it was like, oh, we weren't just partying. Like there was something happening. And when he was able to put the context of the party in that moment that we'd forgotten at the height of AIDS, it was like, I mean, I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. And he's talking about it from, a gay man's point of view, who's best friends with a straight man who used to come to the party, who was the most incredible expression of fashion you'd ever seen. Daryl, who recently passed, he was amazing. And there were other straight men in the room, and Hilton basically was like, people were coming in there to kind of come out of their straightness, you know? And this was a beautiful space that was elevated, that kind of like celebrated this. And so it wasn't like a scary place that was like dark with a red light bulb, and it was like elevated and celebrated. And it helped that it was upstairs from this place that was really notorious at the time. It was like, you know, in People magazine, Liz Smith, every night, you know, it was like just celebrities just everywhere. Like every, you know, you'd go there on a typical night, and it was like, you know, all the supermodels, U2, you know, like every pop star, every rock star, every celebrity, you know, Dolly Parton, Calvin Klein, like everybody. It was, and the room is tiny. I mean, it was like this big, with an upstairs. And it was a beautiful space, very like French bistro feeling. And on Sunday nights was this party. So you would have a little bit of overflow of people who knew, or like the lesbians who are now like really emerging at the time, with like Jenny Shimizu and Ev Salvel and, you know, the girl with the dragon tattoo, you know. So that it was just this feeling in this room that felt so exciting, you know, like not only were we becoming visible on in media at the time, like in increasing ways that we'd never been before, in a positive way, I should say. We've been visible, but not told by us, and it wasn't positive, that we got to see it in real time, in a real space. You can walk into a space and see us in this way that was not tragic, you know? I can't remember, I was gonna say something about that. So anyway, yeah, Hilton's first interview spawned the film, and then the podcast came out of the pandemic, which was so weird because when we started the film, it was the idea of the death of lesbian spaces. And then then Pulse happened, and it felt like our queer space is just gonna become obsolete, like the fear, like we're back there, like in an awful way, you know? And it also reminded, and then the pandemic happened, and it was like, what are all real, yeah, all spaces done? Like it was so weird. And then, I can't remember what I was gonna say. This is menopause, I'm sorry, my brain is not at 1,000 speed that I used to. Anyway, during the pandemic, queer spaces, obsolete, I can't remember. Anyway, I was coming to a point there, but anyone have any follow-up questions to that? Maybe it'll trigger my memory.
This is more of a comment, the scariest 6 words you could ever say. But I just want to say how, and I hope I don't get a little clems when I say this, how much it resonated with me to hear you say that no one asked you a question after you said your email. Which just as, in like different ways, there's so much. There's so much in that. And what you're doing with this podcast is rectifying that. And I just, and to piggyback on that, the concept of like of the ripples that you sent out, and some people's time horizon were immediate, some people's 20 years, some people's can be 20 more, some will be after we're all gone. But that also speaks to the project that Gordon and I are doing too, because it's, don't take for granted that some folks don't get asked questions until the end of their time, and after so much of the work has been done, and they get taken for granted sometimes for having done the work. And I just think that was so, this is so amazing, but that really sat with me and resonated with what you're doing.
Thank you, Molly, for tying that all together. Yeah, I mean, you know, open to not just questions, but conversation. So if anyone has anything to share.
You said that you tried to spend time only in queer spaces, or you only spent time in queer spaces. How do you navigate that?
I have set my life up. I mean, so I would say, and I talk a lot about that in here. Yeah, I think it's just the way that I've set my life up. I don't I work for myself, primarily, unless I'm like doing a modeling thing for a day or like consulting or doing contract work. But primarily I work for myself in the businesses that I've created, in the spaces that I've created. And so I'm not really around the streets. I'm just not. And when I do have to interact with them, they know about me, right? Like they've usually hired me for something, and it's usually like for queer representation or whatever. So I don't even really have to, I just like sit in the corner and they're like, oh, thanks so much for being here. And I don't talk to them that much because I'm like, you guys are straight. We don't have a lot in common. No, but seriously, yeah, I think it's just a blessing, and it's a result of how I've worked very intentionally and diligently to set up my life so that I can primarily have more flexibility because I am autistic, and so I don't have to be in an office space or interacting or sharing energy with people that I don't want to. But in the times that I do, I just, try to keep it brief and have them be paying me.
Right.
Anyone else have any questions? All right, well, we're going to be here, so you can talk to us directly if you want. And thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Molly. Thank you, Wanda. Thank you, Jesse. Jesse's got some great. I was actually going to read a quote from Jesse from here that is so beautiful. Actually, you know what? I'm going to end on it because it's such a beautiful quote. You have some great conversations in here with some beautiful people that we know.
Yeah, I just want to say that Jesse is actually featured in the book. So in each chapter, I bring in the voice of someone who inspired that ingredient in my life. So some folks actually have quotes. I reference their work, or they have quotes, things that they've said to me. But in the chapter that Jesse's in, it's called Queer Your Friendship. And I had a brunch conversation. I hosted some of my friends for brunch at my house, and we had a conversation about just the pure romance and intimacy of our friendship and how it's impacted our lives. And so that conversation is a full chapter at the end of the book.
I love that. I'm just going to read this short piece that Jessie contributed. She said, I recently listened again to the conversation between Esther Perel and Krista Tippett on eroticism. And eroticism as this powerful, transformative life force. And that eroticism is not sexual. It's like the shared joy of what it means to be alive together and the textural experiences of that life. And I wanted, that was competing with your quote, to open tonight, just to invite us into this space of eroticism when we're storytelling and sharing and sitting around the campfire and this beautiful, like we're all here together. The holiness of it, to me, it is calling in the erotic, the erotic, because of being seen, being witness, and how that connects us to our own stories and our own connection to this life, this one precious life that we have. All right, good night. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to support this podcast and film, you can donate through our website, www.cafetobacfilm.com. And please be sure to follow us at Cafe Tobac Film on social media. Till next time.